Hello, my name is Michael Fagan. Over the past few weeks, I have thoroughly enjoyed my time researching and exploring how role-playing games can be used inside of a classroom. Throughout this presentation, I will be referring to role-playing games as its acronym form, RPGs, just for simplicity's sake. However, what is an RPG? An RPG is about creating your own character with a group of other people. These other people also create their own characters, and your characters explore a fictionalized world in which you make different choices and encounters. The game is run by a game master, someone who presents players and the characters with these scenarios and choices. They are the ones who unravel the narrative for the players. The players, when they make these choices, usually end up rolling dice, which are modified by character statistics and abilities and skills and whatnot. So this adds a controlled randomness to the results that the players want, and it requires both improvisation on the player and on the role of a game master. So, what RPGs would be useful for a classroom? Well, after doing some research, I have found two that I believe to be quite useful. The first is Dungeon World. Now, Dungeon World is an open license, open source game where modification is freely encouraged and is narratively driven, meaning that the player choices in their character forms are very freely open to interpretation. The game master is encouraged to bend rules and allow players to do what they want. It's very open in that sense. Compare that to something like Dungeons and Dragons, which is, in my opinion, very inaccessible for beginner players, particularly young students, as it is very rules dense and there's a lot to read and a lot to memorize, both on the side of the player and on the game master, which would in this case be an educator or a teacher. The other RPG that I have read and I would like to recommend in this video is Engine Heart. In Engine Heart, the players create characters which are robots. Now these robots are simple things. They are designed for one of two tasks, such as trash collection, greeters, things like that. If you've ever seen the movie WALL-E, it's sort of like that. I would recommend it usually for a younger audience, but you can explore interesting themes such as human impact on the environment, work routines, economics, things like that. So, as I said, over the past few weeks, I have been working to understand how I would integrate an RPG into a classroom. And I've came up with two models of how to do this. The first model I wish to discuss is an activity that I designed for a grade 10 Canadian history classroom. I intended this to be a meld of role-playing game and simulation game. Now, if a role-playing game is a individual cooperative effort where players take the role of specific characters, then a simulation game is a group effort which is usually competitive and set in a realistic or simulated scenario, which is something that you could come across in real life. Now, this first model, I intended to use the board game Diplomacy to help teach World War I history to a grade 10 history classroom. I would divide the students into 7 groups. These 7 groups would represent the 7 great powers that participated in the First World War: England, France, Germany, Italy, Russia, the like. And each student within this group would take on a certain role, such as head of state, head diplomat, and these roles would have specific functions within the group. For example, a head diplomat would be responsible for negotiating with other diplomats from other groups. So I would start this game by assigning students to these different roles. Now, where does the role play element come in? I would introduce the role play element by having each student research the historical figure that had occupied that role and give them a character sheet of how this historical person acted in many scenarios, what their background was, what their education was like, so on and so on. The second model that I wish to discuss is a broader model of how to implement RPGs into a classroom in a more holistic sense, whereas my first model with diplomacy was really only meant for a unit or a few lessons on the history of World War I. This holistic approach is, for me, a more daunting task, as there are many different ways that people have done this. For me personally, I would start by implementing role-playing elements into a language arts class or a drama class or an arts class as an introduction. I would then take the knowledge from those classes and try and implement these character designs throughout other subjects such as math, geography, history, and the like. I am personally partial to Dungeon World and would probably operate with that system, but I would encourage any educator that is interested in the subject to do your own experimentation, to do your own research on the topic, to see what matches your students' interests and your classroom needs. To this end, I believe that discovering how to use RPGs in a classroom is really up to the educator. There are many ways that you can discover how to use RPGs in a classroom. There's a lot that's written on it, so I encourage anyone who is interested to look it up. What I must say, though, for anyone who is interested in a subject, is that there are two main problems that every educator must address when it comes to dealing with RPGs in a classroom. One being time and one being size. Now, I think managing time as educators comes with experience, and I would generally recommend running an RPG in an episodic format or integrating it deeply within each individual lesson that you already have planned, so there's not much of a difference. The issue of size, though, is a different matter. You can either solve this through, say, dividing them into groups and designating a student with a good grasp of the rules or responsibility of being a smaller scale game master. Or perhaps best but most unrealistic is having a class of 30 simply just take turns, which, although unrealistic, would be an exercise in patience. So where do we end on this? What have we learned about the implications of using role-playing games in classrooms? Overall, I think that role-playing games in classrooms are an excellent tool to help teach students reading and writing skills, basic arithmetic skills, probability, social skills, and perhaps above all, patience. I believe that RPGs can really help enforce these skills and can make an excellent classroom tool to engage the students in your ordinary lessons. That concludes this TED Talk. I hope it has been informative for you all, and I will include links in the description to the RPGs that I have mentioned and the board game that I have mentioned, Diplomacy. Thank you for watching.